Chapter 13. I just wanted to see his face. Mary Brunzell suggested the title for this chapter, so I dedicated it to Mary and her husband, Jim. My dad and mom had split when I was less than a year old. It never bothered me not having a father, maybe when we had a father and son thing at school and I had nobody to invite. I was raised by my mother and grandmother, and my aunt would live with us periodically. I never thought about looking up my father. What I thought was that my grandmother, who was like Schultz from Hogan's Heroes, ran the guy out. It was never important to me. But many years ago I found out there were these companies that searched for lost relatives. I asked my wife to write this company and see if they could find out anything about my father and what happened to him. My mother never talked about him. Didn't tell me a thing. No pictures or anything. We heard back from them with his name, where he worked, and all this information. But I wanted to see a picture. I found out he lived in Las Vegas. In 1997, I was out there to work Halloween Havoc. Cindy and I spent the weekend at Mike Tenney's cabin in Utah. When we left for Vegas, we decided to look up the address and see who lived there. We drove to the other side of the Strip in Vegas. It was a nice neighborhood. We found the house and parked in front of it. Let's just sit here and watch to see who comes in or out, I told Cindy. But if there's a kid on the porch playing a banjo, we're getting out of here. So I waited. It was probably 2 minutes, but it felt like hours. I couldn't wait. We drove up to the driveway. I asked Cindy to knock on the door and tell whoever answered the door that we were lost and were trying to find Firm Street, something I just made up. This woman came to the door. She had glasses and grayish hair and kind of looked like she could be a sister. I didn't really know. I told Cindy to put her butt up against the hood of the car, so whoever was facing her had to look at me. I had a camera nearby, and as the woman was talking to Cindy, I picked it up, but I immediately dropped it. I picked it up again and it started making this whirring sound. I couldn't figure out how to fix it, so I threw the thing down. The lady said, "I don't know where Firm Street is. Let me get my husband." She walked into the house, and then she and her husband walked out. He looked like me, but he was too young to be my father. He walked past the car and saw me and kept walking. He stopped and turned back, looking at me for just a second. He walked into the garage and came back out with a street map and laid it across the hood of the car, trying to find the street for Cindy, but he just couldn't. As Cindy was getting back in the car, they said, "We wish we could help you. We wish there was more we could do." She got in the car and I told her, they seemed like nice people. "I'm going to go in." Cindy said, "Let's go to Denny's first and have breakfast and talk about it." Cindy, I'm this close. After 53 years, I'm not going to choke on a bone at Denny's or get hit by a car. "I'll be right behind you," she said. I got out of the car, walked up to the house, and knocked on the door. The woman came to the door. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said. "May I see you and your husband, please?" She stared at me for a moment. She called out, "Jim." Later on, Dottie, the woman I was speaking to, told me that she was concerned that the car had broken down and, since we're all Heenans, we can't fix anything. My idea of repairing something is opening up the phone book and calling for someone. Jim walked out. He was wearing a Notre Dame t-shirt and the Notre Dame football game had just started. "I have reason to believe that you and I are brothers," I said. "Come on in," he said. I walked into the house. I was nervous. The most nervous I've ever been in my life. I showed him my birth certificate and where my father signed it. I also told him that my father's job in Chicago was as a printer who printed labels for Al Capone and racing forms. He would perform in bars with cymbals on his knees and a banjo. And if a guy was down on his luck, he'd give him his suit. I sat there for an hour and told him everything I knew. I showed him my pictures and passport. Not once did he say, "Wait a minute, no way." He just sat there and listened. When I was done, Jim stood up, said, "Welcome to the family," and hugged me. I asked him for a picture of my father. He showed me a photo of my father with a cowboy outfit, hat, gun, and everything. He looked like Blackjack Lanza in his 70s. "You can have it," he said. Cindy and I went back to the MGM Grand. The phone rang the next morning. It was Jim. "I haven't slept all night," he said. "I called your other brother in Florida. I had an older brother, John, who lived 6 miles from me, that I never knew. He's 10 years older than me. He's from Chicago, like they all are. He's retired now and enjoying his family and grandchildren. Jim is a security cop at the Hilton in Las Vegas. He also was in Air Force security on Air Force One with Presidents Johnson and Nixon. My younger brother, Bob, of all names, is an educator and a former priest. Now all the kids ask him at school, "Where's your brother?" He answers with, "You have to pay me." It turned out walking up to that door was the best thing I ever did. I now have 3 brothers. My father died in May of 1990 in Las Vegas, and my sister had passed away as well. My brother Bob took me over to our father's grave. I put my hand on it and spoke to my father for the first time. "I'm not mad at you. I'm not mad at you at all," I said to him. When I worked at the Showboat in Las Vegas, about a mile from them, my name would be on the marquee. I asked them if they ever put 2 and 2 together. They said that people would ask them if they were related to Bobby Heenan, but they always said no. They just didn't watch wrestling. Now John wears a Bobby Heenan t-shirt and challenges people around town. I have nieces, nephews, aunts, and uncles. I'm a godparent to one of my niece's children. My brothers and I talk every month. They're a great addition to my life. I'm proud of all of them and they seem to be proud of me. I remember as we were leaving that driveway in Las Vegas, my wife said, "Isn't this great?" "Yeah, it's a ball," I said. An hour ago we were on our way to Denny's. Now I have to buy 85 Christmas gifts. Bobby the Brain. Epilogue. Around March of 2001, I was having pain in the side of my jaw right behind my ear. I had lost a tooth there and I thought my jaw had moved or something. I let it go for a while. Meanwhile, in the late spring, it really started to bother me. Someone told me that I had TMJ or something else in the jawbone area. I went to the doctor to get it checked and he told me I had to go to an oral surgeon. The oral surgeon told me that I had to go to my dentist and have a mouthpiece made to correct the problem. I was doing all this back and forth when I started to notice that my speech was getting slurred and my food tasted metallic and funny. My dentist said, "Where are the x-rays from the oral surgeon?" I told him he didn't take any. My dentist called the surgeon, who told him that the machine was broken on that day. I was misdiagnosed for quite a while. Finally, Dr. Gene Bollies, who did a 7.5-hour operation on my neck, told me to go see Dr. Douglas Klotch. That doctor x-rayed me to make sure that I didn't have a brain tumor. When he didn't find that, he x-rayed me again and saw that I had a growth on the back of the tongue and throat on the right side. The doctor told me I had throat cancer. I was already standing and started walking in a big circle in his office. I got real cold and real sweaty at the same time. I looked at Cindy, who was in there with me, and said, "I have to sit down." A nurse took me into this room, laid me on the table, and put my feet up. After about 10 minutes, I was okay. The first thing that occurred to me was to ask the doctor, "How long do I have?" It was like Family Feud all over again. Just trying to think of how much time I had. It's the truth. The second thing I thought of was, am I going to lose my hair? In the end, Dr. Klotch told me I needed 6 weeks of radiation and chemotherapy. He gave me an 80% chance of recovery and told me not to worry. He really is a good doctor. He told me that I was really healthy. I asked him if there was anything I should do. He said, "Yeah, don't buy any LPs, and pay me in cash." But I was very concerned, because my daughter Jessica was getting married around the same time. I was just told that I had cancer and, on top of everything else, Christmas was coming. I didn't want her to know that I was diagnosed with cancer until after the wedding. But she was home when the doctor called to make the arrangements for my chemo. She found out. Jessica told me, "Dad, you're tough. You've been through worse. Mom had cancer and beat it. You'll get better. You have an 80% chance." I heard from all my friends. I was surprised by the people that did call and the ones that didn't call. I guess that's how you find out who your friends are sometimes. The week after I found out that I had cancer, I called Jim Brunzell in Minneapolis. We've always been good friends and always kept in touch about 3 to 4 times a year. I told him what was wrong and we talked for a bit. About a week or so later, I got a phone call from none other than Jesse Ventura, the governor of Minnesota. He had spoken to Brunzell and wanted to give me some encouragement. We talked for about a half hour. He wished me the best. I figured I'd never hear from Jesse and began to wonder who I would hear from next. The only person I had called was Brunzell. A half hour later, the phone rang again and it was Greg Gagne. He had talked to Brunzell too. He wanted to wish me good luck. I never expected to hear from him. The very next day, I was gone. When I came home, my wife told me that Vern Gagne had called me. I said, "I'm sure he has. He's called me a lot of things." She said, "No, he called. He heard that you were sick and wanted to wish you a speedy recovery." Angelo Mosca called me. Harley Race called me. Pepper Gomez, who lives out in San Francisco, called me a couple of times. Nick Bockwinkel, Hawk, Jack Lanza, Baron von Raschke, Hillbilly Jim, George the Animal Steel, and the Crusher called. Even David McLean from WoW called me. I would never have expected to hear from some of those people at all. One day I was sitting upstairs, just going through some mail, and the doorbell rang. I thought to myself, I don't feel like seeing anybody. I walked downstairs and looked out the window. I saw Mike Graham, Eddie Graham's son, with Vern Gagne. I thought, oh hell, he's finally come to get me. So I grabbed a coat, wrapped it around my arm, and grabbed a knife and a broken bottle. Not really. I opened the door and said, come on in. I greeted Mike and looked at Vern and said, how are you? Extending my hand. Give me a hug, Vern said. Mike lives down the road from me and Vern was in town on business. He wanted to see me and Mike told him that he knew where I lived. After a little while, Mike had to leave, and I asked Vern to stay. For the next couple of hours, we drank beer and talked about old times and how they changed. We told Wally Carbo stories and stuff like that. When he needed to leave, I gave him a ride to where he was staying. We shook hands and I told him how nice it was that he had stopped by. He told me what an asset I had been to the business. That made me feel good to see Vern come over and call. He usually doesn't do that for anybody. It always seems that it's the people you would never expect who come around and do something like that. We got nice letters from people. At first, I kept things quiet. After a while, though, I figured there was no sense in hiding it anymore. Your life changes when you're diagnosed with cancer. Traffic doesn't mean anything anymore. I don't want to give the guy in the bulldozer the finger because it just doesn't matter. Just like I told my wife before our honeymoon, if I get there late, start without me. As I write this, I am in my second week after my 6 weeks of treatment. I can swallow a lot better and my speech has improved. It still feels like I have Mr. Ed's tongue. Getting cancer really changed my perspective on life. At Christmas time, my sister-in-law was visiting. We have 4 cats. One of the cats was underneath the tree. She walked up to me and said, the cat is by the tree. I said, you get him, I've got cancer. She thought that I was worried about a cat. They had just told me a week before that I had cancer and she wanted me to climb up a tree with the balls and the lights and chase a cat out. That was my Christmas with her. But it's the truth. I owe my life to Dr. Bollies, Dr. Klotch, and Dr. Harvey Greenberg, my oncologist, not to mention the staff at Moffitt South Outpatient Clinic at Tampa General. They were great. They answered all my questions and didn't pass anything off on someone else. They knew what I was there for. No one cared who I was. Ken, the assistant to Dr. Greenberg, confessed to me later on that he was a big WWF fan and that he watched me when he was a kid growing up. Other staff members did that as well. Throughout the whole treatment, I knew there was nothing I could do but play the hand that I was dealt. And if the brain could cheat and grab some spare change while in the waiting room, so much the better. That's what he would do. Watch your wallet while you go to the bathroom, he'd say. Watch your insure for you. Seriously, if it weren't for them, I would have ended up with some proctologist with a thermometer behind his ear, wondering where his pencil was. I'm not going to retire. In fact, I'm looking forward to doing personal appearances and I may even start a singing career. The WCW couldn't shut me up. I'm sure as hell not going to let cancer do it. Just remember, the brain has not left the building yet. And he didn't lose his hair, but he was able to grab a couple of wallets and a few cases of Ensure. This is the end of this book, wrestling fans. Bobby was one of the greats. I hope you enjoyed the program. See you next time.